Chikwebuka Wakure, could you mute your mic, please?
What's going on?
Come, let me go see your face. Bring your 5,000 for tomatoes. I have tomatoes in my farm, but later go and harvest. I want small tomatoes that I can use to cook. Like 1,000 tomatoes. Bring 1,000 tomatoes, you can make it up. Give me 4,000. Tomatoes, 1,000. Then So how much is your painter bucket last? These tomatoes that expensive.
I can't show them now. What is going on?
Oh, it's actually an internet. Jeez.
What's going on now? Excuse me.
Oh, yeah, pretty. Fine. Fine. How is it? Oh, okay, fine. I said, I'll ask you, okay, I'll find out something from my friends. So I will not ask that question. Okay. Okay. Oh, it's because the person wants stamp one form. So we need person who will fit directors or maybe careful. Okay. All right. So no wahala. Make I just ask other. All right. No wahala. Okay. Thank you. All right. Mimi, I did. All right. How is everything now? So, last year, yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Yes. Oh, fine, very well. All right. Yes. Now, I have to make one inquiry. That like, do you know anybody foreign affairs? Oh, okay. Uh, okay. Well, she's in UK now, but she's okay. I needed to do one thing in foreign affairs. That's why I need somebody that I can talk to help us do something. Okay. Yeah. Then I need to some. Uh, all right. Me, I'm free. I'm free to go. I'm free to go. Let's look at it. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My time says it's 4 p.m., and so it's showtime, so to speak. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this breakout session called the Youth Step Forward session. My name is Toby Adibowale, Samuel Toby Adibowale. So you may be seeing Samuel, and then you might be wondering how come Toby is not Samuel, but then both are my names anyway. So I'm the chairman of the MBA Young Lawyers Forum, and I'll be moderating this afternoon session titled Youth Step Forward. Essentially, this session has been designed to encourage young people who have made their mark. I believe everyone can hear me. Is Mr. Hart complaining of about the audio? Okay. Okay, so I take it that everyone can hear me. So this session has been designed to encourage young people who have made their mark in business, in policy making, in politics, in governance, and in social engagement to share their experiences and ideas on how young persons, young lawyers, and young professionals generally, young Nigerians, can engage the system, can engage other citizens, can engage the polity, can step forward to make an impact in transforming the nation. Nigeria is celebrating 60 years of independence this year. The Nigerian Bar is similarly celebrating 60 years of conferencing, and we are celebrating all together at this time that we are coming of age. And in coming of age, we are also asking the question, what role are young people playing? What roles do we have to play in making sure that things become what we want them to be? What roles are we playing to see the Nigeria that we desire, to see the legal profession that we desire, to see the kind of economy we want? And that is exactly what we're going to be discussing this afternoon. I have a very rich panel with me to discuss and do justice to this issue. I have on my list, on my panel, Aditola Onoyemi, who is the head of trade remedies and the assistant chief negotiator at the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations. I also have with me Ademide Adim Akwamunam, who is special assistant to the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Similarly with us this afternoon is Ms. Fakria Ashim. And we also have Mr. Mark Okoye, who is Commissioner for Economic Planning, Budget, and Development in Anambra State. Before we continue, I'd like to share a particular quote with us. It's something that would perhaps guide our conversation. It is perhaps a reference to the demand, the challenge that is posed to young people. The world demands the qualities of youth, not a time of life, but a state of mind, a temper of the will, a quality of imagination, a predominance of courage over timidity, of the appetite for adventure over the love of ease. Essentially, what this is saying is that the expectation is that young people will move outside of the comfort zone, will refuse to be cowed by the impressions around them, will refuse to be subdued by the situations that they see. So, especially those of us who live in developing countries like Nigeria, where we are constantly bombarded on all sides by not so pleasant realities, by challenges, but with desire to see something. And the challenge for us is finding the best solutions to make those things that we desire to become reality. And so this afternoon, we'll be identifying what the situation is in Nigeria. I mean, we have a very large population of young people, yet there's still a general concern about the extent of youth participation in governance and in policy making. We'll be looking at what opportunities exist for young people to make change happen in the country. We'll be looking at what kind of training and empowerment is required to get young people to do better, to step forward, to take charge in Nigeria and indeed on the continent. We'll also be looking at how we can get more out of the number that we have as Nigerians. I mean, for those who study the market, for those who study economics, those who study the economy, the focus is not solely on the huge population. It's usually also about the power, the buying power of that population. So you get to see things like the addressable market when you're talking about the population figures. So we'll be looking at how to enhance the quality of youths in Nigeria, and then we'll be looking into the opportunities and the avenue for leveraging technology to build capacity and facilitate reform in our systems. And before we leave, we'll also look at what role and what opportunities, what realities exist in this age and time when social media has become a rallying tool for change across the continent and indeed across the globe. To what extent can hashtags demonstrate or ignite the need for transformation, for change in different areas of our lives? For instance, in governance, can we, by talking and making comments on different issues, contributing our opinions on different issues, cause change in policy, cause change in or a reversal of certain unfavorable policy directives? Or can we, by virtue of the use of social media, create a new order for ourselves and for the country? So you welcome with me my esteemed panelists, and very briefly, very shortly, I will allow each one of them to share their preliminary thoughts on the topic for discussion. But before they do so, let me give a very brief background for each one of them. Like I mentioned earlier, we have Adetola Onoyemi, who is the head trade remedies and the assistant chief negotiator at the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations. He's someone who has won many awards, including the Future Africa Awards 2019 prize in public service. He has played a very pivotal role in driving change and legislative reforms for enhancing the business environment in Nigeria. Most notably, Adetola was involved in the negotiations for the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, and he continues to play a dominant role in negotiating the best outcomes for Nigeria on the international trade law scene. He previously worked as a special assistant on industry, trade, and investment in the Office of the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And we trust that this afternoon he's going to be sharing a lot of his insight on policies and economic developments in Nigeria. Similarly with us this afternoon, like I mentioned earlier, is Ademide Adim Akramona, who works as special assistant to the Speaker of the House of Representatives. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, as we all know, is one of the principal officers of the National Assembly and invariably plays a major role in driving and directing the affairs of the National Assembly. Thus, if there is any law, any legislative action that would come out of the National Assembly that would shape how Nigeria is going to move in a particular way or the other for the course of the next 3 years or more, then the Speaker of the House of Representatives is going to be playing a major role. And as you know, as we all agree, that a leader is often as empowered as the people who work with him, his advisors. And so, as special assistant to the Speaker, what goes on ultimately in Nigeria. Prior to this time, he served in various capacities at very major institutions, including the Indiana Institute of Technology. He's been involved in development and environmental protection, and he has worked in research and development for technology institutes. Yet another notable panelist with me this afternoon is Ms. Fakria Ashim, who is the team lead at Mayafi Initiative. She has significant experience in mobilizing for change through the use of technology. She has lent her voice to very notable causes in northern Nigeria and indeed across Nigeria. She's influenced policy, contributed to policy formulation and discussions around empowerment of the girl child, and she's been trained in business administration, including obtaining a degree from the Abu Dhabi University. This afternoon, she will be joining the conversation, and I trust that we'll be learning a lot from her on how to influence change in the society. Last but not the least, Mr. Mark Okoye is a Commissioner for Economic Planning, Budget and Development in Anambra State. And prior to this time, he has served as a senior member of the Investment Banking Division at Afrinvest West Africa Limited. Like Adetola is also a recipient of the Future Awards Prize for Young Person of the Year. He got the Young Person of the Year Awards in 2016. In 2017, he was also listed as one of the most influential people of African descent under 40. In April 2019, in recognition of his industrious input into governance in Nigeria, he was recognized by Nigeria's Vice President and given an award as Reform Champion for Anambra State, particularly having contributed to the enhancement of that state's record on the World Bank's Subnational Doing Business Index. So we'll proceed now to our conversation by allowing each of the panelists to introduce themselves further and share their preliminary thoughts on this topic. So permit me to welcome first Ms. Fakria Hashim.
Hello. Well, it's an incredible pleasure being invited here to speak. Sorry, I went off there for a bit because my internet stopped working. Samuel, if you could repeat, the last thing that you said, because I kind of didn't get you there.
Okay. So you can just give us your brief overview of what the role of youth should be in transformation. Okay, while we try to get Fakria to respond to that, I'll move on to Mark. Mark, your opening words.
First of all, I'd say thank you, Samuel. Thank you to the organizers and the participants. I also extend thanks and appreciation to my co-panelists. I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. So I'd like to start from perhaps diving a bit deeper on what the problem is. Everyone on this platform understands that where the country is today with double-digit fast rising unemployment, high level and rising poverty levels across the country, weak systems across education and health in the state in the country, present quite a difficult situation for all citizens, not even just the youth. So typically, when you find yourselves in this sort of difficult situation where on the revenue side, as a nation, we're struggling, and we are only implementing our national budgets and even across states at a maximum of 30 to 40%. So there's a revenue squeeze, but on the expenditure side, there's critical issues across the country that we need to intervene. It calls for ingenuity. I think it also calls for being quite creative with how you run a country, and also some level of innovation. All these problems I've listed, government cannot on its own solve everything, but government has a role to play in facilitating discussions, the policies, the programs, and putting in place structures that allow other forms of capital and other players within its ecosystem take advantage of these opportunities. So the question is really that you're asking is, what is the role of youth in this? You and I know that 65, in some cases, depending on what statistics you see, 70% of Nigeria's population fall under the ages of 35. But in the 3,000 elective positions that are available every year, the 6,500 senior level executive appointee positions also available every 4 years, young people under 35 account for less than 5% of that amount. So that paints a picture of a misalignment, a mismatch, such that when you go across the country, if you ask anybody who's below the age of 40, what are your issues? What is the most important thing you'd like the government to intervene for you? There is always linked around the means of livelihood, how you can get them jobs, how you can give them opportunities to participate in developing the economy. When you ask the 70-year-old, those are the guys who still want to build the roads going into some village that only 2 or 3 cars will drive past annually. You know, and who want to build health centers in the middle of nowhere because that's the way they are accustomed. But on the flip side, when you look at the insecurity issue, for every example of insecurity in the country, 90 to 95% fall under the age of 40. You're talking kidnapping, you're talking cultism, you're talking cyber crimes, etc. So until government arrive at the point where they start to prioritize our problems, we cannot truly transform our society. So all this is essentially leading me to, if the critical mass in government is formed by people who understand the current issues, understand the various platforms, are open and happy to accept technology and use technology to go about their daily business, you need people on the policy making side, people on the CSO side, the NGO aspect, speaking the same language with the majority of the population. If that doesn't happen, we continue to face some of the issues that we're facing today. But I'm happy to contribute a few more about my story and my own experiences as we go across. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you, Mark. We're going to come to your story in a bit. And before we do that, let me talk to Ademide. Ademide, you presently work with perhaps one of the most important legislators in Nigeria, and you have been in this space for some time. What do you think is the prospect for Nigerian youths who intend to shape lawmaking in Nigeria?
First of all, I want to say it's an honor and pleasure to be invited to speak on this panel, obviously with such distinguished panelists like myself, Honorable Commissioner Adetola, Ms. Fakiri, and everything. I'm glad the audience is here to obviously listen and for us to, interact actively. Like Ms. Honorable Commissioner said, the government, we're in a very precarious situation in Nigeria, and the government cannot do it all. The government is not going to be able to do everything to get this country to where we need to be. So I feel like we need to understand that at this stage, Nigeria has a lot of lost time. Be it from military rule to the coups we've undergone and everything, we have a lot of lost time. And every time we hear youth talk about how we must be given the opportunity, but the problem that we face is when youth or us young people get that opportunity, do we know what is really on hand in the country? A lot of people, it's easy to sit on the sidelines and see, oh, this can be done so easily, that can be done so easily. But I feel like we as youth need to, like you said, the CSOs, the NGOs, we need to understand the situation that's actually at hand in Nigeria, the actual challenges, not what we see on social media, not the false news shared on WhatsApp groups. We just need to understand the actual issues. So when we have that opportunity to get into positions to help with policy making, we won't be overwhelmed, because a lot of these leaders now that we have, as much as I want to say, the situation we are, some of them can be overwhelmed by the actual challenges the country has. So it also involves, like you said, the NGOs, the CSOs, the young people, News Association of Nigeria. We have to just work together in understanding what the majority says. Like you said, we need to understand what is actually going on in Nigeria to be able to work on any policies. Everybody says, like, because of our population, we say social media is the way, always the way to go. But at the end of the day, social media is just a tool for information. It's what we use that information to do that actually matters. So if you use social media as a tool to spread news, spread policies, but then if the National Assembly is passing a policy now, I think a couple of weeks ago, the Kama bill that the president assented, a group of people complaining that there was a particular clause in the Kama bill that I believe that they said NGOs and churches, if they find out there was financial misgivings among the leadership of the societies or the NGOs, that the CAC Commission can come in and set an interim committee and sack the board. And then people just went online and a lot of young people actually went online and were abusing. They just went on to say, oh, this is this and the president is that. But I feel like that's not what helps these people listen to us and understand where we're coming from. We can't get any better using social media to abuse and use it to castigate people. We have to use it to actually get our information out. The whole point of using social media to help influence policy as done around the world is petitions, is for creating a major consensus to be able to move from different fields to fields. I think one of my colleagues, he's an essay to speak at New Media, Kunle Shomoye, he's actually working on an app. It's called the Vote It app. It basically brings the people to their legislators, the people making the laws, our constituents like you and I. We can interact with what is going on the floor of the House and the Senate. When you know a bill is being passed, you have direct access to the senator, you have full information on the bill, and you can comment, you can create a dialogue with the senators or the House of Rep members and help you communicate. This bill shouldn't pass because this is what's happening. That bill shouldn't pass because us at the bottom are not getting the benefits of that. And that's how I feel like we should be able to do to interact better with the people who are actually making the policies, if we don't want to involve in the policy making directly, because not everybody wants to be a legislator. Not everybody wants to work for a legislator. People want to work in business, people want to work in law, people want to work as doctors, but the policies that make still affect them. So we can't expect everybody to get involved in politics directly, but there are indirect routes that we can take in terms of communication and dialogue. So I feel like that's something we have to work on as a group, being the majority consensus, just being able to communicate with these people better and use the technology we have to also show them and improve them in general. I'll talk more when any of the questions come up. Hope I didn't take too much.
Certainly. Thanks for that input and that insight. Before we go to Adetola, I'd like to see if Fakria is able to share her thoughts now.
Yeah.
Fakria, for instance, has been very visible in the space for using social media, which is one of the things that Ademide just referred to, in promoting the cause of women empowerment and in resisting certain notions that have somewhat been ingrained over time in the society. For instance, one of the campaigns that we've seen thrive starting from social media over time is the Me Too campaign. And one of the very notable faces behind that campaign was Fakria. Fakria, do you want to share quickly with us what you think the role of social media and technology is, or how useful it will be going forward in driving change in the society?
Thank you so much, Samuel. I mean, I guess before I get to that, I'd like to follow up on what one of the speakers was saying, which would eventually lead me into why exactly myself and the people I work with are doing the things that we're doing. So, I find it very interesting when, people in government, make statements about how the government cannot do it all, right? So, and that has become the fashion, that has become the response. We've seen campaigns like Change Begins With Me. And I mean, my perception of all of that is that is an abdication of responsibility. Yes, I mean, CSOs and NGOs can start campaigns about how people can sort of change and shape the way we interact with our environment. But government people have no excuse to run with that kind of sentiment, because the reason I personally am quite loud on social media is because there's so much government insufficiencies in the way our country functions. It's the most basic things, and honestly, it beats me. It's the most basic things like electricity, like transport, these things that we're so accustomed to not having, that the government isn't providing us with, but they want the change to start with us. How do we even get to that from this position of deprivation that as young Nigerians were in, right? So I mean, my presence on social media, my activism on social media is as a result of these deficiencies that government has left in place, that government has failed to play its, its role. My involvement started from politics, from the 2015 campaign, but from that it became more social development centric, because if you're not walking into a public clinic and seeing that budgets are provided, but there's absolutely nothing there, then you're trying to follow up on cases for victims on sexual violence where police, the courts are totally neglectful of. So, I mean, these are all parts of government functions that government refuses to play. I mean, so one of the most basic, I guess, service that a government is supposed to provide for the people is security. That is the underlying, most basic function of a government, just the security of its people and their properties. And our government has failed abjectly, right? In every corner, every part of Nigeria today. I don't think Nigeria as a country has been this insecure in the past decade. And I don't mean in terms of isolated incidents or just regional insecurity. It's the level of spread across all of Nigeria, which threatens young people and our capacity to do anything, to move around, or to, I mean, even and one of the things that we've seen is that beyond insecurity pervaded by these violent different arms, we've seen politicians taking advantage of the insecurity to shut young people up that are trying to just be active citizens. We've seen disappearings, and we haven't seen any pushback from the justice sector. I mean, from you guys, from the NBA, we haven't seen much pushback in terms of security, in terms of the disappearance, in terms of calling the government to abide by the rule of law. So, I mean, these are all of the things that, really compound and make things quite impossible for young people in Nigeria. But nevertheless, young people are striving. That's not because of anything. I'm sorry, that's not because of anything the government is doing, but in spite of it. So I yield.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'll just mention before I go on that the NPA has been very responsive to issues of rule of law and has regularly advised the government at the center and across different states on the right position of the law on different issues at different times. So we'll go to Adetola to have his opening thoughts. And Tola, I'm going to hit you with some numbers. You are probably familiar with these numbers. Depending on who you listen to, you are told that Nigeria's youth population is about 42.5% or about 45% of the population. Recently, Nigeria's repository for data, that is the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, came out with the figures relating to unemployment figures. And of that, I mean, for instance, we have a working population of 116 million people, according to the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. Nigeria's population is generally said to be about 200 million. We have a working population of 116 million people. And of that figure, at least 21 million people are unemployed. About 35 million people, just 35 million people are fully employed. And total number of, underemployed people is about 22.9 million. As a trade negotiator, what impact do you think these figures would have in getting the best deal for Nigeria, for instance, when we get to the continent in making the best out of, for instance, the Africa Continental Trade Agreement? Do our numbers serve as a negotiating point, a strong point for us, or do these figures reflect a burden that other countries would be wary about? Adetola. Okay. So we'll come back to Adetola.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead. I was muted by the, yeah. So I'll say a number of things, right? And I think I'll just start with something that Brian Kaplan said, right? Brian Kaplan said, good ideas cost good policies cost good growth, and good growth costs good ideas. Now, thinking about young people and Nigeria and development and trade, my thinking is very clear. My thinking is that young people make up, and regardless of statistics that you choose to pick, the worst statistics says young people make about 65% of Nigerians. Some statistics put it as even higher, depending on the age you choose to use to cap what a young person is. And the truth is that actually creates a very critical mass of who can push for important things in the country. Now, I have this argument that I say that the four important parts for good policy is government, private sector, civil society groups, and academia. And this is how I think of it. I think of it in this way. I think of it as government is to a great extent about political power. That's what it is. It's about security, it's about all those things. But in the end, the biggest components of those that make up government are politicians or technocrats. And so it's about political power. And so the truth of the matter is that because of that nature, a lot of times, those who find themselves in government are not entirely the most savvy in economic policy, in trade policy, in investment policy. And the reason is very basic. If I was no shade to anybody, if I was a bus driver in a state in Nigeria and I became a very strong politician and then entered political office, nothing in my career skills me or trains me for the sake of being able to make good economic policy on inflation, which is actually Nigeria's fundamental biggest problem, or even fiscal policy, monetary policy, lending. None of those things give me this capacity. And so the truth is, he's handicapped in that. But what needs to happen is this. What needs to happen is that the government then should open up that decision-making space and policy-making space for people in private sector who understand more of that direct impact of policy to start to support in policy crafting. But the thing is this, private sector also gets very selfish. So private sector would actually maximize profits and not try to drive for good policy change that is not only profit-driven. And that's why the civil society also comes in, to ensure that even as we drive for things that lead to economic development, that there's some ethical and moral standards put into it. But the truth is, even with all that, there's still method, there's still mechanism, there's still process. And that's where academia comes. And I say this, that when you track the best of policies in every country, those four players have to be very active players in policy making for you to be able to drive anything. The second thing I would say is this, is that policy making and economic development is very complicated in the sense that it is not a one-size-fits-all example. You can't say, oh, it worked in Singapore, so I'm going to copy and paste. And we see that happen a number of times. People just say, oh, this policy worked in France, we're just going to copy and bring it to Nigeria. It doesn't entirely work that way. The reason is because the three things that matter the most in economic policy is one, a readiness to learn the basic information you need to know, two, craft solutions to it, and three, adapt the solution. So the idea is that you're supposed to be measuring to say, this policy worked, it didn't work. And that's where young people are beginning to drive and play a very important role. The truth is, on this call alone are 3 young persons in government in different levels who are
an active part of driving economic policy. And that's one of the progress we're beginning to see. I remember I became an essay to the president on industry, trade, and investment at 24, right? And the truth is, that's the kind of change we're beginning to see, where young people are becoming an active part of policy making and are pushing for what needs to happen. Is it perfect? No. Is it close to perfect? No. But the truth is, that's more of what we need. And the reason is because young people are a critical mass. We've got the numbers. And so if you've got the numbers, you need to push more of those boundaries, push more for policy making. And what you see that's going to change is that young people are beginning to move from that idealism of, and some of the things Fakre is saying, that idealism of, it's not enough, to, okay, what are the steps? And an example of that is the Not Young to Wrong bill, which I worked on as a member of the Abuja Global Shaper community. It was basically an issue of saying, almost calling the senators who were involved in that bill to come to sessions to say, listen, this is why it's important, and engaging them directly. And we need more of that on policy making, on economic policy, more of those active driving type work. The last thing I would say is this. Why young people matter for policy making is because we're able to take ideas and creatively use them to solve problems. And I'll use a very basic example that we don't think about a lot, healthcare. Now, the truth is, healthcare in Nigeria is still a big fundamental problem. But the truth is that the very method that government uses till now to deal with healthcare is we're going to build hospitals everywhere. We're going to build primary health facilities. What is the fundamental problem with that? The problem with that is that's a Western prototype, and it's great. But the problem is that you don't have the funding to build the hospitals that you need to cater for 200 million people in justice. When you look at the data, what does the data tell you? The data tells you that 60-70% of those who go to hospitals today go for primary health care. So what that tells you, and what's primary health care? It's basic things like the doctor observes you. What's your temperature? What is this? It means a mobile app can solve 70% of our healthcare problems. And that is the kind of critical, creative thinking that young people need to start to bring to the fore. So we need more of young people getting involved in governance. Now, to your question more specifically, the markets is not, and they'll tell you that in economics, that demand is not just who wants to buy, it's who wants to buy and has the capital to buy. And that's where the Nigerian market is a very peculiar situation. So we've got this massive market, but purchasing power is still a challenge. The reason is because of spending cap. And so the truth is, what then needs to happen in economic policy is that we need to start to have conversations about what kind of economic policy favors our greatest strength, which is a cheap labor force, a fast learning labor force, but beyond that is a critical mass of market that has the capacity to buy. And those are some of the important questions we need to be having around crafting trade policy, economic policy for the country.
Okay, thank you, Adetola. You've gone ahead of me to talk about certain things, but we'll come to that. So I want to touch base with Mark. When it comes to making the best of our numbers, as Adetola has alluded to, you presently work within the executive arm of government. And that is perhaps the closest, as being a commissioner, that is one of the closest levels you can get to becoming elected. I'd like to know, from that proximity that you've enjoyed, what do you think are the very realistic steps that young people can take in mobilizing for elective positions, particularly to influence the policies that are necessary to drive change, to empower more young people, for instance, enhance the buying power, the economic capacity of young people?
I think Mark has to be unmuted.
All right. While we wait for Mark, I would give Ademide another opportunity to also touch on what's relevant laws. So, for instance, one of the major ways by which things change in the country.
Hello.
Okay, Mark, did you hear my question?
I kept trying to unmute myself, but I think it took
sorry about that.
To finally achieve that. I think I got your question, how people can, get into, mobilize support for elective positions. So what are ways that they can get it, and tips based on my experience? Well, I don't occupy an elective position.
I understand, but you have some proximity right now.
I definitely have thoughts. I have been in and around government for the last 9 years. But before I even dabble into that, I'd like to respond to Fakir. She made a comment, and I do like the healthy debate, and I think that's the beauty about such panels. I think perhaps her and I don't quite agree on what the definition of government can do everything. And the best way to describe that sort of phrase is essentially by taking Nigeria's budget and dividing it by 200 million people. You get 42,000 naira per person, you get 3,500 naira per month per person, and you get 111 naira per day. If everybody got 111 naira per day, i.e. means we're not paying salaries, we're just doing a conditional cash transfer to every citizen in Nigeria, can we survive on 110 naira? Impossible. You say, okay, maybe it's Nigeria, there's still inefficiencies in revenue generation and what have you. Look at the best of countries. The best GDP per capita, GDP to government spending to GDP you'd see is 20 to 25%. Government's real strength, in my view, is in creating the policies that stimulate economic activity, that create jobs, that create the hospitals, not necessarily government in itself taking its budget and building all those different. If there's sufficient money, then there will be no need for government. Everybody will just literally go to a robot, input your request, and you get it the next day. I want a house, I want this, I want that. Government's role is a facilitatory role. They would intervene in social services, but other than that, the core capital area that creates jobs for you and I and the teeming population, we need facility, we need the policies and not necessarily the spending, as the case may be. But that's something we can always discuss. In terms of election, I would like to take a few steps back, because in my view, I think when young people want to participate, everybody's thinking of how can I be a councillor, or how can I get in at State House of Assembly member, or how can I be a House of Reps member? Many people did not know that in 2016, when I was appointed commissioner, I had already been working in the state for 4 years. How did we achieve that? How was I able? Obviously, different circumstances. Circumstances are different for everybody. My story started in 2010 during the Good Luck campaign. And I had all these different ideas of what government was not doing and why they should set up. And our own version of advocacy at the time was on BlackBerry BBM groups, where we would say all sorts of things. However, I soon realized that having worked with Edo State government, I was advising them. I was one of the advisors for a capital raising exercise in Edo. So I realized that you can't expect Jericho and gold from the diamond mine. If the people on the inside don't have the capacity, are not invested in, if the people on the inside also don't have the intentions, you can't expect any sort of magic from them. That's one. Two, I also realized that I was always talking about what the problems were and how all these solutions and various solutions on my BlackBerry group, but I was not taking action. So myself, in my situation, I started to write. Then there wasn't necessarily Twitter and all these different ways where you could engage with your leaders. So I wrote to 42 ministers. The letter is there online. I didn't get a response. I wrote to 3 governors. I didn't get a response. I asked 2 commissioners who I knew to take me up and give me an opportunity. I still didn't get a response. I happened to run into Donald Duke at an event. And before he even said anything, I told him, you're going to mentor me and you're going to give me the right skill set, let me leverage on your experience and network, and I want you to introduce me to my governor of my state. And that's where the story started. And from an SA to SSA and different opportunities, we continue to take on these opportunities and trying to do the best of those opportunities when given. I remember when I was an SSA in 2012, for many young people in government, and this is something we have to try to start correcting, the mindset. There's the passion and the preparation and the hustle to get in, but typically they view getting in as an achievement, whereas that's when expectations and responsibility creeps in, and you're expected to try to come up with various ideas to transform the state. So one of the big things I did was creating one of Nigeria's first investment promotion agencies, simply because my background was in that. And when I came into the state, there was a focus on foreign direct investment, but I got quite disgruntled and disappointed whenever we traveled to foreign countries looking to raise capital from them. And we were very quickly asked, is Anambra near Somalia? Or some of the issues around East Africa, how does that affect Anambra? And you find out that you spend these resources with little or no impact. But we went back to the drawing table, asking ourselves, what are the comparative advantages in our state? Our people understand industry, they understand enterprise, they're big employers of labor, they have they're captains of industry, they're major capitalists in the country. And we started to engage them and we realized that if we reduced the bottlenecks or eliminated them in some way, made it easier for them to do business in Anambra State, that we would be able to generate a lot more capital, which will come in, create jobs, stimulate the local economy, and make people a bit more prosperous. And this is essentially what we did. Anambra State Investment Promotion Agency today is a testament. So to wrap it up, this is my story. Many times people will say you're privileged, you went to a good school, you got a good job, and that's why you can say this. In every situation in our lives, you're either, depending on how you look at it and the context, you're either privileged or you're also underprivileged. So it all depends on how you take those opportunities. If you happen to be in Surulere and you don't know anybody in government, Surulere has like 4 or 5 wards or 10 political wards. Within those wards, there's an executive council. There's a chairman, there's a chairperson, deputy chairperson, woman leader, youth leader, publicity secretary, accountant, all these different opportunities. It's all a matter of, do you truly want it? And if you do want it, when you get it, what do you do? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. Very, very insightful. And we're going to come back to that point on ease of doing business and creating a more enabling environment shortly. But I wanted to ask Ademide a question about the extent of influence that young people who work with lawmakers have. I mean, and I'm asking this in practical terms. So we, for instance, understand that the legislature plays a significant role in driving change. Laws govern the country. Everything revolves around the law and its interpretation, but before the law is interpreted by the judiciary, it first has to be made. Now, the laws that are being made and the roles that the lawmakers play, we sometimes have the question, has enough inputs come in from those who are largely affected by those laws? If Nigeria has a massive youth population, then we just have to ask the question, have young people made enough input in the process of making those laws? We, for instance, have seen laws that attempt to cripple the efforts of young Nigerians to start certain businesses. The conversations have been online in the last few months about some states taking some steps to tax and overregulate some enterprises. And we are always asking the question, where are the young people who work with these lawmakers? Are they getting the benefit of advice and examples of people who feel the pinch? So Ademide, in practical terms, to what extent do the young people who work within the legislative circle get listened to? And what, in your own view, do you think young people can do to get their points across a little bit more effectively to those who make the laws that affect the country?
Can they unmute Ademide? I think he's muted also. Oh, and Samuel has also been muted. All right.
Okay, so Ademide may need some assistance in unmuting Ademide. Okay, so I'll park that question. Okay, Ademide is up. All right, thank you. Please proceed.
To refer to Honorable Commissioner, I feel like I would have failed my constituency if I don't let you know that we actually have 9 wards in Surulere, not. But and also to Ms. Patoya, what I wanted to say, I think Honorable Commissioner touched on it on an economic aspect when he said, if you allow me actually respond to that, moderator, am I all right to go ahead?
Yes, please proceed, but keep it briefly and then we'll focus on the question.
What we said about government can't do it all, he referred to it on an economic point of view. I just want to look at it on a very basic point of view. We are a vehicle, like Nigeria is a vehicle, right? We've broken down somewhere. We cannot continue spending time arguing about how it happened, what happened, what the issue is. We have to actually profess solutions to going forward. As a Honorable Commissioner is now, if he wants to run for, let's say, Senate or governor, let me not put you in trouble with your governor, but Senate or governor or House of Reps, if he knows that the youth, as many as we are, as many as might be in his state, can be used as weapons, if he knows that he can call the youth chapter of the APC or PDP or APF or whatever and tell them, how many of you can help me get so amount of ballot boxes from this polling unit? How much do you need? If he knows he can call, young police officers in police college and say, you know what, I need you guys to get these guns, I need you guys to proceed to this polling booth and do so. What stops him from respecting the youth and listening to the people that want to talk when we have to talk? We have to respect ourselves. When we say it starts with us, it's not just based on having sense or it's just based on just common ethical values. We have to accept that we are not going to be used as weapons to do different things. We're just going to do things the right way. When we have certain ethical values as young people, obviously different people come from different backgrounds, different people have different issues. That is all well and good. But what I'm trying to say is when I say it starts from us, everything starts from home. If they know that they can call us to do whatever they want to make us do and give us money or give us anything or bribe us or do whatever, then they're not going to take us seriously when it's time to take us seriously. It just doesn't work like that. So that's what I mean when I say government can't do it all in that terms. But when you talk about extents of influence young people have in policy making, I'm sure a couple of...
to be specific.
About a year ago when the speaker came into office, I think he announced 19 or 20 essays. About, I think, 60% of them, maybe about 11 of them were under 35. So most of our policies in the House are driven because the essays, obviously, when you're working on bills, they don't just work with the speaker. Various House of Rep members, when they have a bill that they want to come up with, they can request assistance and say, oh, I have a so bill I want to pass. I want to sponsor this bill. Can you work with me on doing research and everything? So that happens. So there's actually a very large amount of influence that youth have in policy making. There are a lot of SLAs. Every House of Rep member, I think, has 5 staff, SLAs. Same thing with senators. They have 3 SLAs, 1 SA, and some office assistants. The SLAs are like the backbone behind the senator. It's the same thing, the backbone behind the House of Rep member. It's like the associates are the backbone behind how the firm actually works. So a senator doesn't necessarily sit down and draft a bill. Like you said, I think someone made a comment about copy and pasting Singapore. I know it was you, but I don't want to say it was you, but you made that comment. It doesn't just come up with a senator going on YouTube and on Google and saying, social media bill. He sits down with a group of individuals and says, I want to pass a bill on so. Work with me. How can we get this done? So it can be you or I that work with the senators and the SLA, and you tell me, you want to pass a bill on regulating social media. I go to Google and copy a bill and give it to him. He has to trust that his staff are actually doing the work they're meant to do, who are mostly young people, because mostly the people that roam the halls, as much as you might not believe, of the National Assembly are actually young people, not the senators or the House of Rep members themselves, but the people that roam the halls, people that do the work. So it's not necessarily, I think we have to, like you're saying, in terms of getting involved in policy, we have to do enough. We have to do more work in terms of bringing the policies together. So we have to be educated on those matters. If I know, like this, you mentioned some policies that were deterring work. I think you said some policies that are coming up from legislators. I think you might be referring to the 9-post one. It was trending a while ago about
No,
how...
not just that, but there are a couple of other things.
I had various discussions with people after that. The 9-post bill about more taxing or registration fees increasing, starting new businesses involving transportation sector and dispatch riders, as they're popularly known as. And I want to just, I think I will be doing the National Assembly justice or the executive in any aspect, the government justice, in saying most of those bills and most bills and motions passed in Nigeria are not actually fresh bills and motions. They are mostly amendments because these bills and motions date back to the beginning of the Republic, 1979, the first constitution we passed. So like the 9-post Act, I believe that everyone was complaining about, that act has actually been there for, I think, since apparently 1979. And so the moment I think the ministry decided, I'm going to start enforcing this act, it became a problem, and the current House of Reps and senators were the ones being abused and castigated. And you understand what I'm saying? But those bills existed before. So it takes you as maybe a CSO, like you see there's a gap or there's a loophole in the bill that can work against the youth. You bring it forward, and then the amendment happens. That's basically the process. So it's not like the bill was brought, all these motions you're saying were brought from scratch from this current. They've existed ages ago. So we, as obviously, like you said, when I keep saying this, the government can't do it alone. Okay, I know I'm not saying in that aspect, but that's how the NGOs and the CSOs come together. They have.
So I think it is.
Yes.
For instance, in 2019, at least 2 prominent members of the National Assembly sponsored certain bills that appeared to
state one bill. You have to state a bill.
Okay, so the social media bill, I mean, you probably are aware of the full name of the bill, but then it was commonly called the social media bill, which sought to punish the use of certain phrases and expressions against public officials and all of that, and appeared to be going above board in trying to control what amounted to use of decorous language in public. Now, there was the risk that that law could be implemented in a way that repressed freedom, and many young people were rightly concerned and then began to protest on social media. So one question that kept recurring was, do the lawmakers have young people advising them? You as an aide to the speaker, for instance, and I am aware that there are a number of other aides who are young persons. To what extent do you influence what goes on into the laws that get passed?
And I feel like in my first response, I actually said that we play, most of these lawmakers you are saying, what I'm trying to let you know is that they do not wake up and put these bills together. And I'm not blaming anyone, I'm not blaming the youth that work with them, but each lawmaker, when he puts a bill together, they have legislative aides that are under them that actually do the research, the work, the drafting of these bills. Those people tend to be young people. If you're referring to Nigerian use of youth, I think the UN zone is 15 to 25, Nigeria says 15 to 40. So if you're saying from 15 to 40, I'm telling you that most of them are under that. So if you're asking the question, do lawmakers have youth advising them? Yes, they do. Now the question is, are the youth advising them? What interest do they have? That's the question.
How do we get them to?
And how do we exactly? And that's what I was trying to, like the social media bill, I think the Singaporean bill, like it was copied from Singapore. It was actually in the Senate, it didn't come to the House. But I obviously followed the noise around it. And why I use that example is that I can tell you, I'm not with the senator, I don't work with the senator did, but the senator did not go online, pick up his laptop and type social media bill. He has a group of people like you and I working with him. He said, we have to do something to regulate fake news in Nigeria. I'm assuming I'm the senator. We have to work, we have to do something to regulate fake news, which is a massive problem in Nigeria, but we won't get to that. And it's mostly youth that drive that, but we also won't get to that. But when we're talking about, we have to make a way to regulate fake news. I call you, I say, Mr. Samuel, you guys find a way. Oh yeah, you and the other 2 SLAs, oh yeah, they go. Find a way to bring this bill. I want to put a bill on the floor day after tomorrow. You I'm not saying you are lazy. I'm not saying you're tired. I'm not saying you are stressed. I'm not saying you are ignorant to the fact about what the law actually stated. You went online, typed, got social media bill, copied and pasted it, plagiarism like it's called in America, where you in America, all over. And you presented it, hold on. You presented it to the senator.
Sir.
The senator trusted that. He hired people to work with him, diligent, youth, strong-minded individuals. He goes, presents it on the floor, and then boom, the backlash happens. In that aspect, it's only the senators that are to be blamed. But there are people that work with him, and these are the same youth you are asking if we work with him. Yes, we work with them. Yes. So everybody would know, everybody's not perfect.
So there's an issue to correct there. There's an issue of capacity to address in that place, and that's probably going to that inspires my next question for Fakria, and it's about education. And
sorry, 1 second. While you're asking your question, can they unmute Fakria, please? She just indicated. Thanks.
Yes, please. Thanks a lot for spotting that.
Quickly mention something, Mr. Detola. I think you worked with on the Not Too Young to Run bill. I actually know you for that, and I want to say what he's talking about capacity as well. It settled the age factor. The Not Too Young to Run bill settled the age factor, but you know the actual clause missing in that is actually the qualification factor. Making a 25-year-old eligible to run for senator does not mean this is going to be an educated 25-year-old. It does not mean it's going to be an educated. You understand what I'm saying? The qualification is so that's something you have to work on. That's something you should
get to work on. Get to that point. So Fakria, I know you're passionate about education, and this is one question that Mark is going to touch on, as well as Adetola, because I've seen the efforts they've made in relation to education in different capacities as well. So Fakria, you're passionate about education. Nigeria's budget for education has generally always been below global standards or global recommendations. We can have that argument separately about whether the global recommendation is taking Nigeria's local realities into context or not. But I mean, having a budget allocation of about 6.7%, 8% for education clearly appears to be low. And the challenge appears to even be worse in certain areas. So Fakria, I'm wondering, drawing from your experience studying abroad, being concerned, looking into the issues in Nigeria, how do you think we can make progress in this regard? Do you also think that NGOs and other well-meaning individuals might play a big role in helping us to leapfrog gross illiteracy rates across various parts of the country?
Thank you. Before I move on to the question about education, I'd like to respond to what Mike.
Okay, can we please keep these responses very short?
What I wanted to say was, me saying that government should never attempt to abdicate its responsibility does not equal, calling for a communist style way of running government. No, I mean that's an assault on private enterprise. If you have to if you're telling government to share money across all, across board, but no, that's not what I'm saying. And I think people that have those ideas should be banned from public office. Yeah, no. Because I mean, without private enterprise, what do we really have when it comes to nation building? We have very little. So I mean, to move on to education, I mean, so the problem with education in Nigeria is that it cuts across every single level, from primary school, to all of these tertiary institutions. And I mean, budgeting is obviously one of the bigger issues that affect the quality of education. But also when we look at our universities and our polytechnics and stuff, it is also about what drives research and development. A lot of, I mean, my university here where I'm doing my master's, what drives all of these institutions is the focus and the amount of resources they fuel into research and development. which Nigerian institutions do not do at all. I mean, when you look at TED Fund's budget for research and like annual budget for research and development, you will cry, because this is these are universities that are literally driving nothing. During the pandemic, we were seeing innovations coming out from top Nigerian universities, public universities, of people creating hand sanitizers, something that you can literally do if you get on YouTube for 5 minutes. These were the kind of innovations that they were trying to push out, some of the basic things in life. So I mean, it has to do with the resourcing, but it also has to do with the capacity of the people that are in the places to actually push for propelling development in these very critical areas. So I mean, when it comes to education in Nigeria, we're doing really a terrible job, and you actually get to see that when you go to NYC camp. I was there for 3 weeks, and it was an incredible experience, because it led me to understand how a lot of the Nigerian public institutions function. It's that it has to excel in Nigerian universities and beyond. It's that it has to be your own personal drive to actually go beyond what you're doing in the university and what you're being taught, because chances are most of what you're being taught, especially in terms of technology and all of that, is outdated. So you don't come out from institutions like that and be competitors on the global stage, because we just don't have the capacity for our own to compete out there, because we don't arm them with the tools, because we don't put a lot of resources there, because a lot of the things that we're banking on in our institutions are outdated information, and there is a pushback from
Okay, so Fakria, from the perspective of civil society and NGOs, which are mostly run by young people, what do you think can be done to bridge this knowledge gap that generally exists in Nigeria?
So, I believe NGOs are supposed to supplement what the government is doing.
True, I agree.
Fill the gap of what the government should do. And what we see in Nigeria is that NGOs are having to fill gaps that the government is leaving. Even when it comes to social welfare, when it comes to catering to IDPs, even when it comes to education, which it really shouldn't be. So, but I mean, but the reality is that without those NGOs and civil society, then we will have a complete breakdown, like a complete degradation of our institutions, because they are on themselves trying to prop up some elements to not see the entire nation just crash into futility, right? So, but I mean, NGOs are already doing a lot that they can, but
okay.
what we must ensure that we're doing is that we're forcing government to play its role rather than filling the gaps entirely. Because if we do that, if NGOs and civil society continue to do that, then government has an excuse to step back completely because someone else is doing it. And we have to ensure that we do not normalize that for the government. But some of the things, I mean, NGOs do a lot of capacity building, especially in primary and secondary schools. They do trainings for teachers and all of that. But at the we have a lot of schools, but we have very little capacity to push our schools into the future, which is the now in every other country and most continents around the world. But that doesn't seem to be the reality.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean,
thank you, Fakria.
I'm not done with that part.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'll give you 1 more minute to run up.
I lost my train of thought. But
sorry.
What I'm trying to say is that, I mean, NGOs and civil societies should focus less on doing the job of the government and doing more of forcing the government, like all of these agencies, UBEC, SUBEB, ASU, all of the, sorry, not ASU, the NUC, do more of forcing these people and putting them in the spotlight, because now we have the advantage of social media. So we can actually, we can shame them into doing what they should be doing and force a more transparent process of what they should be doing, rather than taking over their functions for them.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Fakria. And a question would go to both Mark and Adetola. And I want you both to respond. And that question is about what extent do you think government can spend to enhance human capacity? Adetola, you mentioned human capacity in the course of your introductory remarks. And Mark presently is in charge of planning the budget for a subnational state, that is Anambra State. And I know for a fact that, well, resources are limited, but in deciding how those limited resources are spent and utilized, we usually want to look for the best results. So to what extent do you think government should spend on human capacity development, and how best should that money or those resources be utilized to get the best results? Mark, first.
I think Mark is muted.
Okay, so Adetola, you can proceed while we sort out Mark's.
Well, I was hoping Mark would go first, but all right. So, yeah. So I'll say a number of things. But before I go into that question, maybe while waiting for Mark, I wanted to respond to 2-3 things. One of the things I wanted to respond to was what Ademide said about working on the use of Not Too Young to Run bill. A lot of people worked on it. A lot of young people actually galvanized for that bill. But the thing to say is this: is that you need to realize that we're running a country, and when you're running a country, the truth is that you cannot disfranchise people on the basis of their education, right? So you can say things like there's a minimum standard of education, right? But you can't go past that, because at that point you're starting to disfranchise them. So the reason of setting younger thresholds for age of 25, after that point, the point is, as long as someone has a primary education, they should be able to. In fact, in some countries, they'll tell you that as long as you're at the age that you can run for office, you can run for office. So I think I wanted to put that context. Second thing I was going to say was the question about what Mark responded to about how to get more young people to drive and get involved. So I wanted to say 3 things. One is I wanted to say the issue of raising capital. So in the last election, for instance, one of the things a number of myself and some friends did was start to contribute money to back the candidates that we thought we enjoyed. So I know, for instance, that a friend of mine was running for AMAC. The AMAC position, I supported to back. A friend of mine, one of my a big sis, was running also for a position. And I found, and a number of places where I just heard a candidate was in the States and I thought they were doing good work, I'll send funds. So I think that's one thing young people have to start to do: galvanize capital. Because the truth of the matter is that politics and getting political power is a lot about spend, right? I know there was a statistics that says that to win a governorship election in the smallest state, you need to spend about 20 billion. So the truth of the matter is that if you don't want people to steal, then you need to galvanize capital. The second thing I was going to say about that also was organizing. And I think we don't do this enough. We need to do it more on social media, but we need to organize more. And why organizing is important is this, is that the reason you spend so much is because you need to organize. But if you can organize, then it cuts down your amount of money you need to spend. So the truth of the matter is organizing. If 65% of Nigerians determine that somebody will get elected, that person will get elected. So the truth is, the second thing we need to do a lot more is organize. The third thing we need to do a lot more is accountability. And when I say accountability, what I mean by that is not just organize, not just vote, but also things like holding people accountable. There are procedures for recalling members of the House. There are procedures for putting pressure and holding government accountable when people and following through with it. So that's another thing that young people must do a lot more. The last 2 things I'll say on that more generally is pressure groups. I say it a lot and I tweet about it a lot, that we don't have enough pro-business pressure groups in Nigeria. We need more people doing that hard work of articulating the actual real. So for instance, on finance, and we need a lot more of that, people articulating clear positions and pushing for it. The last thing I'll say on this is innovating around problems. So one of the things technology has helped us do in the last few years is innovate around problems. We need young people driving that more and then center staging it. The truth is this, and this is how politics would always work. It's sad, but it's how politics will always work. Young people will need to spend more time, and that's what, and a lot of us are already doing that kind of thing, right? Doing more time understanding the power centers, doing more time understanding how politics work, and then working with that system to push for what you want. So for instance, we did with the Not Young to Run bill. I worked on the KAMA bill, right? I worked on the ease of doing business, PEBEC. I worked on the Nigerian Office of Trade. So truly, there's track record for doing this. And truly, so what we need is more of that kind of work, more of that concerted effort to drive and to get things done. And we're seeing people like Mark, we're seeing people like Akere, but they're getting commissioner appointments and getting more center staging in politics. And we need to do more of that. Now, on the human capital question, this gets interesting. You're going to push me to controversial areas now. The thing is, this is my opinion on human capital. I think the biggest work government needs to do is to create environments that ensure that human capital can thrive. The truth is, can the government spend entirely for human capital? No. But can the government ensure that an environment is created where every spend for human capital can go the farthest? Yes, and I'll give an example, education, university education. The truth is, I feel this is my strongest opinion. The government should focus its primary spend on primary education and secondary education. At the university level, the government should stop funding universities and start funding students. So the way we have student loan systems in the US, what should start to happen is simple, is that a student writes an exam, JAM, whatever it is, and funding is attached to the student. So the thing is this, a student can choose the university it's going to go to. Now, what does that do? It means a university has to upskill itself, because if a university doesn't upskill itself, it cannot attract the students that have the funds that will come with the funds. So imagine a University of Lagos, University of Ibadan, OAU, whatever other schools, 10, 20 students write 1,000 students write exam. And based on that, they all get some funding. It could be grants, it could be loans, whatever it is. And then you say, whoever can attract them, the funding goes to them. So if I spend my first year in Unilag and I don't like them, and I say I'm moving to OAU, my fund moves with me to OAU. The point is, once you start to do that, what happens is this: we're subsidizing education and it doesn't make sense. It's not working. And that's kind of more creative thinking that we need around human capital. The same applies, and the question also is, how do we also start to flip the thing on its head? What's happened so far in the country is that we focus all our energy on, you need to get a university degree to start to get productive. We need to upturn that. And that's the reason why you see young people who wait 10 years, they're writing JAM 10 times before they get a university. We need to upturn that. We need to take some of the things like what Switzerland is doing with vocational education, where you can start your career with a vocational skill and you can almost match in the market like someone who went to university. So the point is, that's the kind of things that government can do around human capital development. And the truth is simple. It starts with one single thing. And that single thing is simple: understanding that human capital, young people, are your biggest asset as a country. And then realizing the second thing, that you are the one as government that has the responsibility to create an environment for that human capital to thrive and not the other way around. The moment that changes, what happens is the government starts to think differently around human capital. So the question is, how can I ensure that 20 million people can go the farthest of their human capacity? That should be the question. And if we make that the core question for human capital, a lot changes about how we think about educational funding, a lot changes about how we think about vocational service, a lot changes about how we think about skills, a lot changes about how we think about positions and jobs, a lot changes about everything. And that's the reason why even the way we give our grants, the way we give our loans, the way we give our subventional supports will change, because now you're saying, how can I help every young person, every human capital in the country go the farthest if they're my biggest assets? Think of it that way. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Adetola. Very, very dynamic approach to looking at that question. So I'd like to see if Mark has a view, and particularly
I think from... Can they unmute Mike? Mark, sorry. I think Mark is still muted. Can we
unmute Mark's mic?
Yeah, just trust us not to talk. You can unmute all of us because it's
Okay, so Mark is here, and before we fully run out of time, and we'll need to take a few questions. But so Mark, from your experience, and perhaps you may also borrow from the experience of some of your colleagues at the cabinet, on the cabinet in Anambra, how do we address the issue of human capacity development, particularly for young people? One of the reasons, for instance, that certain states are overwhelmed is the lack of opportunities in some other states. And for many young people, they cannot see opportunities and they cannot think of how to create opportunities for themselves. So if we empower people, we perhaps have encouraged them to, for instance, create opportunities where they do not see opportunities, just like Adetola has mentioned something. So what is, for instance, your state doing in that regard? And what do you think other states can also do in that regard?
Thank you very much. Hopefully, you will leave me unmuted. The way you've left me.
Don't worry, you're not the minister. We'll not put off your mic.
But that's fine. I think it all starts with putting the right people at the table. I look, and I say this, I use this as an example quite often. I look back to 9 years ago when I was 24, 25. I had just been appointed as an SSC on investments to the governor. The next youngest political appointee at the time was about 48. Right? So when issues concerning young people, creating a means of livelihood, equipping them with the necessary skill set, it was just one voice. But I recall back then what the then governor said. He says, I'm giving this letter to you. Your responsibilities and your duties are captured in the letter. However, you are my first youth experiment. Should you work? Should you do well? If I feel satisfied with your contribution over the coming years, we will accommodate more. Fast forward that to today, Anambra State, 70% of the state's political appointees are under 35. People and driving policy and pushing for positive change. And I use this example as we still need critical mass. The ideas are not, there are numerous ideas for how we can transform education, transform healthcare, impact on gender equality and income inequality. However, we still need people who understand these issues, who are part of that generation, also lending a voice of support from the inside. So I think that's one of the very important points. I think the second is, when I came into the ministry in 2016, and we were looking at the budget process, what profiled and what changes can we make. I was presented by my PEMSEC presented a paper. It says, once we have a state budget committee, which you chair as commissioner, and it has representation from the different agencies within government. And the purpose of this committee is to facilitate over discussions with MDAs and then make a recommendation on the budget to the EXCO. At that point, the governor and executive council members approve the budget and send it to the House of Assembly. So I asked a very simple question, because one thing you will find in government is my PEMSEC could have easily been my grandfather. He was on paper, perhaps he was 62, 63. Off paper, I'm not quite sure how old, but and he would speak to me almost like I was his son. But I asked him, I said, how do we have a situation where we have all internal stakeholders who are overseeing the budget process as it relates to education, healthcare, job creation, and all these different very important developmental issues? And he says that's the way it's always been. So in trying to crack the problem with him, I said, are you aware that it's 20 people who are essentially taking a decision on the spend for 6.5 million people in Anambra State? That's number one. Number two, those 20 people are all internal stakeholders. So regardless of the fact that some go to church, some have a side business in agriculture that they do, they're all civil servants who are doing these different things. So one thing we were able to achieve after working with him was today Anambra's budget process, in my view, is probably one of the most transparent and inclusive. That's the word I was looking for, inclusive. We have representation of all SUG governments in the country, in the state, on the state's budget committee. We have representation of the Girls Guide, the Boy Scouts, National Youth Council of Nigeria, all the different youth organs, because you want them sitting there in the hot seats, listening to the different MDAs, speaking to what their own stakeholder groups require, what they want, and getting it, making the process as demand-driven as it ought to be. Because quite frankly, what we've seen and what I inherited was a case where we sit back, we decide on what the policy will be, start to implement without any sort of feedback, without engagement, without reaching out to people and finding out what they really want. That's number three is I have a view around tertiary education. It's a fight that I haven't yet won, but I continue to. I've been on this fight for the last 2 years. My view is before even we get to the research development, I think if you think of those organizations as businesses, you will cover your cost of goods sold, you will pay your debtors. Then when you have some profit, you typically would invest in research and innovation. In my view, our education system, especially at tertiary level, ought not to be viewed as a non-profit organization, where people who run those organizations are expecting handouts from government to run and facilitate business. In the last 3 months in this pandemic, I have taken 3 courses in institutions across the world. All these courses ought to have cost about $4,000, but I'm paying $500 because it is now e-learning and I'm doing it over technology. And these are various people who are running these schools who are thinking of innovative ways of revenue generation, which can then finance the running of their schools and finance research and innovation and development across those areas. So I think on my end, I've written a position paper about it. I've prepared an executive memo. I've lost the fight a couple of times, but I know eventually we will get there because as the funding pie continues to reduce, right? And expenditure on that end, education, health continues to increase, government will be forced to make very, very difficult decisions. And one of which is people still value their education, their tertiary education. People value these forms of education. And we have examples in Nigeria of tertiary institutions being well run. So why the same way we're borrowing capacities from the private sector and throwing them into investment promotion, putting them in Ministry of Finance, putting them in economic planning, as the case may be, why are we not borrowing similar capacity to run and transform how our schools are being run? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mark. Before we leave, I can see Caleb raising his hands, but I'm not sure I can unmute your mic from this end. If that's possible from the host's end, please let's unmute Caleb so he can ask his questions. Otherwise, I'll just go to Ademide.
His mic is not muted.
His mic is muted. Please, host, can you assist me in that regard? So let's just take a word from Ademide. Okay. Ms. Yemi Adamoleko, I can see your hand raised, but I'm constrained on this side. I'm unable to unmute you. And the chat appears to have been disabled. Okay. While they're trying to do that, last word from Adetola. Your own mic is working, so let's start with you. And then, okay, Fakria too as well. So Fakria, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, can you hear me? So,
yes, I can hear you.
I guess what I want to leave us with is about community, yeah? So, I mean, today we find ourselves to be very integrated into a globalized world. And, you know, we have access to the internet, which is supposed to make things different for us, more different than the generation before us. But what has happened is that we found ourselves like caught up in an increasingly polarized environment. And especially, I'm talking about the Nigerian youth. We have become black bearers of atrocities that we have not witnessed, right? And that you can't fault anyone for that, because what we've seen in Nigeria is that atrocities have been happening for decades and there has never been justice, not even a pretentious truth and reconciliation setup. But what this has done to us is that we find ourselves in very polarizing discussions and argument where atrocities are politicized, where we actually politicize the violence that victims have gone through. And the thing is, most of us are not conscious of how we politicize atrocities. Because
all right, so Fakria, sorry to cut you short because of time. Can you just round up in a few, one or two more sentences, and then we can take parting shots from Adetola and Mark.
But anyway, what we need to be careful is that right now we've seen how divisive rhetoric has pushed us aside, has divided all of us. I mean, we've seen what has happened with the NBA conference. Is we're always looking for ways to politicize issues that have no political bearings in them, and we're very selective with our grievances. And as young people, we should be careful.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Fakria. I would move on to Adetola now. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I think
we are ready.
Yeah. Fakush, do you want to wrap up your thoughts?
He has disrupted my thoughts, but what I'm just trying to say is that we young people have to be different than the more ethno-religious divided generation before us. We need to be careful, because most of the time I find myself like very neutral in an argument that is filled with ethnic and religious bigotry. And most of young people are not conscious that they're falling into all of these traps that makes us the same as the people that don't even know how to use their cell phones or search the basic things on Google. So what I'm saying is we have to be better than the generation before us and not be ethnic and religious bigots, basically.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, Adetola.
Yes, so
1 minute.
I think I'll just say one thing. This is what I'll say. If nothing changes, nothing changes, right? And this is what I mean by that. If we don't consciously change things, nothing will change, right? And I think that's something young people have to come to realize. And that's one thing government also has come to realize. We can pay lip service to economic development, policy change, growth, but if nothing changes, nothing changes. And for me, for young people, that means one thing. It means, like what Fakir is saying, if anything, we need to push the frontiers on ethnicity, push the frontiers on religion, push the frontiers on political allegiances. We need to be able to have conversations on sensitive issues and not get them colored by that. And that's kind of nation we have to start to build. A nation driven by facts, where facts are responsibly interpreted and the truth is upheld. That's one thing. Second thing is young people have to take responsibility for holding government accountable, take responsibility for driving for change, take responsibility for understanding the system. And I've said that again, understanding the system and learning how to work. One of my mentors will say, learn the rules so you can bend it without breaking it, then use it. And that's what I think young people have to do. Learn the rules. How does politics work? Like what system? Where do I make the most pressure points? And we can see some of those successes already. How we're putting pressure on some people and beginning to make change. That's another thing that needs to happen. The third thing is the government needs to create more room for young people to take center stage. More room for young people to take center stage in policy making. I used to say that and even till now, I think I'm still probably the youngest policy making person that in any government position. And that needs to change. We need more young people taking active, substantive roles in policy making work. We need a lot more of that. But beyond that and this is where I probably want to say, young people just need to take responsibility. We need to say, listen, this is our country. We're no longer the future. This is our time. We need to take responsibility and make it clear that the future of the country decides and lies on the back of that 65%. And then just take responsibility. And it's happened already in countries like in countries like Estonia. It's happened in countries like Lebanon, where people would say, listen, we don't want this cadre of politicians anymore, we're changing them. Or we don't want this kind of policy making anymore, we're changing. And that's the kind of thing we need. More deliberate, strategic, intentional troubleshooting of the system and taking responsibility. I think in Nigeria, that works, it's possible, but I just think young people can and must play a better role.
All right, thank you so much, Adetola. So, Ademide, can we get your parting shots, particularly what laws we should be looking out for that would help more young people step forward? Okay,
Can,
Ademide.
Okoye and Ademide.
Okay, I'm trying to get this done. Okay. Apologies for this.
Also, perfect time to advocate for more women inclusion in places like this. So instead of having one woman to 4 men, let's have 3 women to 2 men.
Maybe the moderator does not count. Marcus, maybe you can leave the moderator out.
Let me just defend the MBA a bit. That this was actually supposed to be a panel of 6, 3 men, 3 women. But some people declined at the last minute. So I think
finally I've been unmuted. Sorry, Tola, I just wanted to let you know that. But continue.
All right, thank you, Ademide. Let's go ahead with your thoughts.
Right, I think everyone really touched on everything. I actually learned a lot from Honorable Commissioner Adetola, obviously Fakaria. You guys actually told me a lot. But in terms of laws, you guys said I had to leave here by saying the speaker actually passed the law, the student loan free bill, because you're talking about capital. And then
sorry, I didn't get that.
The speaker actually passed the student loan free bill. It's interest free for all students for universities. So all you need to do is just qualify for these loans, obviously.
And that has been passed concurrently. Has that been concurred to by the Senate?
Yes, it's been passed, and that's actually one of the bills. That's why I said I had to mention it, because one of the bills you spoke about, the bank receives the application for the student loan, it screens the applicants, and bam, you get your loan. That's what the speaker did. But
I was just going to be funded.
Okay.
Just looking for trouble.
What do you say?
Just looking for trouble. How is this going to be funded?
It's going to be funded by the Nigerian Education Bank. That's also in the works now. I think it should be coming out. You hear more about it soon. There's actually something called the Speak to Speaker on Femi Gbajabiamila website. It has most of the information. I'm not here to push his agenda or anything. I know that that's what people are looking at me, but
okay. I'm sure we'll be glad to interrogate that further in due course.
So there are many bills and motion. I just think we just need to work together, to be honest. Like you said, we all have to put our heads together, find better ways of communication, better communication channels. Like I'm going to probably reach out to a few of you actually, sorry, and ask you if you have any interest in any particular bills, motions that you think we might actually need in the House, and put together in a think bank. We can actually, this panel, as we see, can form a think bank the House and the Senate can use in terms of going forward in future bills. I can tell you that for sure. So I'll probably get your contact information. I'll follow you guys on Twitter, DM you understand, get the communication channels going. And I hope we can use this panel to actually do better for ourselves, do better for Nigeria, do better for youth. And that's just all I hope. Thank you so much again, everybody.
That would be great. All right, Mark.
A lot has been said, but I think I would end it by saying getting involved. And getting involved doesn't necessarily mean becoming a House of Assembly or House of Rep member. We talked about a number of things. We talked about how funding is the biggest hindrance to running for elective office. But the average age of the National Assembly is probably mid to late 50s, right? So if we have a young man or woman who's 26, 27 and looking to run for State House of Assembly, and we can bring them in as an appointee through recommendation, reaching out to our principals, and they work for 2-3 years, learn the ropes, build relationships. They're only going to be 29 by the next cycle. So people tend to focus significantly on how funding is a major issue hindering young people, but I think it's a bit bigger than funding. There's also the patience aspect. There's also the mindset aspect. There's also being humble in the sense that, we want to achieve and want to achieve it as at yesterday, whereas we could plan long-term and still get to the same bottom line in a few years. That's one. Two, other thing I wanted to talk about is, as I part is, we must define our purpose. Not everybody will play in government, not everybody will play as CSOs, not everybody will be at NGOs, but regardless of what it is, within your ecosystem, within your environment, you can identify a developmental issue or an issue that affects humanity that you can tag along with, mobilize friends and family and start to fix. That in itself prepares you for public office. And the last point I wanted to make is this is a conference for lawyers and
for non-lawyers.
Yes, it's not lawyers and non-lawyers. But given my experience in the last 9 years, I think lawyers have an amazing opportunity to do well and be successful in public service. Some lawyers will look at themselves and say funding and this and that, but it's the mindset of the lawyer that I think I like when I've worked with them for the past 8 to 9 years. The lawyer typically comes and the first question they ask in public office is, what are the enabling laws? What are the laws that require amendments? What are the laws that support all the different activities you do? What that does, it helps you, one, stay away from trouble, and two, it allows you to work with it, and it gives you a very good understanding of the game. So it's important for lawyers, regardless of where they find themselves, on your way to your course or working in some law firm, to understand that because of your training, you are not better prepared, but you do have an edge to your colleagues and contribute a lot more to nation building. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mark. And thank you everyone for joining us on this breakout session. It's been very insightful. I'd like to thank our panelists, Ademide, Adetola, and Fakria for your insightful contributions to this session. The MBA is grateful for your participation and look forward to more opportunities to interact with you in the future. Thank you.
Samuel, try
yes.
not to interrupt people in the middle of a conversation. That's called mansplaining, and it's
well, he did it to me as well. So
just try not to do that as much.
Apologies. We're actually out of time. Apologies. I was trying to get us, to
reference.
Time. Apologies. Sorry, Fakria. We'll have another opportunity to, have you at another session, and you'll be able to talk a bit more about these things.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So have a good evening, everyone, and look forward to the conference. Please enjoy the conference.
Mr.